Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Evam Satata Yukta Ye Bhaktas Svam Parupase Ye Chapi Aksaram Avyaktam Tesham Ke Yoga Vitama Evam Satata Yuktaye. Sorry, I've got to start. Arjuna Ruvacha. Evam Satata Yuktaye. Bhaktastram Parupasate. Yechabi Aksaram Avyaktam. Tesham Ke Yoga Vittama. Evam Satata Yuktaye. Bhaktastram Parupasate. Yechapi Aksaram Avyaktam. Tesham Ke Yoga Vittama. Evam Satata Yuktaye. Sorry again. Arjuna Ruvacha. Evam Satata Yuktaye. Bhaktastram Parupasate. Yechapi Aksaram Avyaktam. Tesham Ke Yoga Vittama. Arjuna Vacha. Evam Satata Yuktaye. Bhaktastram Parupasate. Yechapi Aksaram Avyaktam. Tesham Ke Yoga Vittama. Arjuna Vacha. Evam Satata Yuktaye. Bhaktastram Parupasate. Yechapi Aksaram Avyaktam. Tesham Ke Yoga Vittama. Arjuna Vacha. Evam Satata Yuktaye. Bhaktastram Parupasate. Yechapi Aksaram Avyaktam. Tesham Ke Yoga Vittama. Any ladies who would like to try? Arjuna Vacha. Evam Satata Yuktaye. Bhaktastram Parupasate. Yechapi Aksaram Avyaktam. Tesham Ke Yoga Vittama. Arjuna Vacha. Arjuna said, Evam, thus, Satata, always, Yuktaha, engaged, Yea, those who, Bhakta, devotees, Tvam, you, Parupasate, properly worship, Yea, those who, Cha, also, Api, again, Aksaram, beyond the senses, Avyaktam, the unmanifest, Tesham, of them, Ke, who, Yoga Vittamaha, the most perfect in knowledge of yoga. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Arjuna inquired, which are considered to be more perfect, those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifest? Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Krishna has now explained about the personal, the impersonal and the universal, and has described all kinds of devotees and yogis. Generally, the transcendentalists can be divided into two classes. One is the impersonalist and the other is the personalist. The personalist devotee engages himself with all energy in the service of the Supreme Lord. The impersonalist also engages himself not directly in the service of Krishna, but in meditation on the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifest. We find in this chapter that of the different processes for realization of the Absolute Truth, Bhakti Yoga, devotional service, is the highest. If one at all desires to have the association of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then he must take to devotional service. Those who worship the Supreme Lord directly by devotional service are called personalists. Those who engage themselves in meditation on the impersonal Brahman are called impersonalists. Arjuna is here questioning which position is better. There are different ways to realize the Absolute Truth, but Krishna indicates in this chapter that Bhakti Yoga or devotional service to him is the highest of all. It is the most direct and it is the easiest means for association with the Godhead. In the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Lord explained that the living entity is not the material body, he is a spiritual spark, and the Absolute Truth is the spiritual whole. In the seventh chapter he spoke of the living entity as being part and parcel of the Supreme Whole, and recommended that he transfer his attention fully to the whole. And again in the eighth chapter it was said that anyone who thinks of Krishna at the time of quitting his body is at once transferred to the spiritual sky, to the abode of Krishna. And at the end of the sixth chapter, the Lord clearly said that of all yogis, one who always thinks of Krishna within himself is considered the most perfect. So in practically every chapter the conclusion has been that one should be attached to the personal form of Krishna, for that is the highest spiritual realization. Nevertheless, there are those who are not attached to the personal form of Krishna. They are so firmly detached that even in the preparation of commentaries to Bhagavad Gita, they want to distract other people from Krishna and transfer all devotion to the impersonal Brahma Jyoti. They prefer to meditate on the impersonal form of the Absolute Truth, which is beyond the reach of the senses and is not manifest. And so, factually, there are two classes of transcendentalists. Now Arjuna is trying to settle the question of which process is easier and which of the classes is most perfect. In other words, he is clarifying his own position because he is attached to the personal form of Krishna. He is not attached to the impersonal Brahman. He wants to know whether his position is secure. The impersonal manifestation, either in this material world or in the spiritual world of the Supreme Lord, is a problem for meditation. Actually, one cannot perfectly conceive of the impersonal feature of the Absolute Truth. Therefore, Arjuna wants to say, what is the use of such a waste of time? Arjuna experienced in the 11th chapter that to be attached to the personal form of Krishna is best because he could thus understand all other forms at the same time and there was no disturbance to his love for Krishna. This important question asked of Krishna by Arjuna will clarify the distinction between the impersonal and personal conceptions of the Absolute Truth. Translation again by Srila Prabhupada. Arjuna inquired, which are considered to be more perfect, those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifest? Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Yate Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nevase Sasanyavadi Pastajade Satarane Amagyan Timarandasya Gyana Gyana Salakaya Chakshush Amilitam Yena Tasme Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Gadadha Shivasade go back to Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Right. So, Bhagavad Gita is not part of Dhamma Artha Kama Moksha. Bhagavad Gita is about transcending society, friendship, love, Dhamma Artha Kama Moksha. Dhamma Artha Kama Moksha is a form of regulation within the material universes. So ultimately people can come to some higher moral ground, some more ethical ground. Like if you look at religion, if you take Christianity, it's all about coming to the mode of goodness. It's all about a pathway. And as a result, there are rules, there are steps to follow. Thou shalt love thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind. Thou shalt treat thy neighbor as thyself, thou shalt not kill, and so on and so forth. It goes on. Those 10 commandments. If you look at the Buddhist philosophy also, it's a very similar pathway. You've got, and this is about true Buddhism, this is about the incarnation of Krishna, Buddha, that was born in Gaya, in India, not the Tibetan Buddhism. Prabhupada relates Tibetan Buddhism as a more of a demoniac pathway in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So if you look at Buddhism, there is the Four Noble Truths. So what are those Four Noble Truths? Those Four Noble Truths consist of omnipresence of suffering, omnipresence of suffering, and the second noble truth is wrongly directed desire. So we have omnipresence of suffering because the desire is not the desire that people or the living entity should choose. And we were talking about that the other morning in Srimad Bhagavatam class about Pravritti Marg and Nivritti Marg. And it's the chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, divine and demoniac natures. So it's all about developing the divine nature, not the demoniac one. So as a result, you have the third noble truth, which is omnipresence of non-directed desire. Yeah, how to rectify wrongly directed desire. That's the third pathway, or the noble truth. And then the fourth one is the Eightfold Pathway, which is just like the 10 Commandments. It's a moral code that one has to follow. So, Krishna consciousness, Sudasattva, is what the Bhagavad Gita is aiming for. And just like, in a sense, we can see that just where the Bible ends, thou shalt not kill. It's all about not killing, moral codes, whereas Krishna is saying in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, thou shalt not kill. He's saying exactly that at the beginning. His chariot is drawn in between these two massive armies. And as we were talking the other morning, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, I think it's the third canto, first canto of third volume, where it stated that 640 million soldiers were killed. It was the biggest battle, military battle, over 6,000 years. And that was all about, it wasn't about moral codes. 640 million people sacrificed their lives simply for what you call Sudasattva. It's all about establishing a king that was completely understanding what is the human form of life all about? What is the purpose of the human form of life? And as a result, that king, that saintly king, Evam Parampara Praptam, would establish a regulatory society, the four orders of life, you know. And in that way, with everyone in society engaged under the rulings of the Vaishnava Brahmins, ultimately, the royalty would rule. And the whole aim of that rule and that advice from Vaishnava Brahmins would be to engage the four orders of human caste to be able to ultimately get them on a platform of bhakti. That was the goal. So today, we're talking, as we've gone through the 11th chapter, which is all about the universal form. Now Krishna has been talking to, Arjuna has been talking to Krishna right through 11 chapters. So through those 11 chapters, he's been talking to a personality, a two-armed personality, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in Arjuna's mind, that's already established. In I think it's the 10th chapter, where Krishna says, Param Dhamma, Arjuna says, Param Dhamma, Param Brahma, Pavitram, Paramam Bhavam, Parusham Satsvitam Devyam, Adidevam Vijam Vibhum. He's already convinced that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Pure Person. So there was no doubt in Arjuna's mind. But the idea of Arjuna posing all these questions to Krishna on the battlefield is for the sake of human society at large, through all the generations and through all the different yugas. This is the supreme message. Even in the 4th chapter, Krishna has mentioned to Arjuna that he spoke this imperishable science to the sun god Vivaswan many, many, many millions of years ago. And in time, this Dharma or this instruction is lost. It gets lost. So Krishna is saying to Arjuna, so as a result of that, I am telling you today that same supreme science that I spoke to Vivaswan many millions of years ago. So at the beginning of the chapter, we're just entering into the first verse of the 12th chapter, which is all about Arjuna again posing questions. And this is, the title of the chapter is called Devotional Service. Devotional service or Bhakti Yoga is a means and the end. It's a means to the end, which is devotional service, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma. But just for the sake of humanity at large, Arjuna, even though he knows at this point that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he's still checking in for our sakes to say, look, even though I'm very attached to the personal form, dear Lord, I'm also attached to the devotion to bhakti, but I'm posing this question: what is the right path, the impersonal path or the path of devotion? So some time back, I think maybe in the Victorian era, in the UK, there was a famous, maybe you can Google this name. Gora, you ready for this? The old Google. His name was George Gaylord Simpson. And he was an anthropologist, taxonomist. And he studied species of life. And if you look at the 8 million forms, Hare Krishna Maharaj, welcome to this humble class that we're having tonight. Nice to see you here. If you look at the 8,400,000 different species of life, they are all created by the Supreme Lord for a purpose. And there is multi-purposes for these different species, because they're all connected to an overall ecosystem that runs the universe, okay? Because Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that without the marginal energy within these bodies, in these different 8 million, and I'm excluding the 400,000, I'm talking about the other 8 million, all these variegated forms, there would be no, Krishna says, besides this inferior nature, O Arjuna, there's a superior nature of mind, which are all living entities who are struggling with material nature and are sustaining the universe. So they're sustaining all these different species of life, okay? So it's very important in the human form of life that we know exactly what the human form of life is about, because it's very distinct from the other 8 million species. So George Gaylord Simpson, he concluded, as an authority on species of life, he concluded that the human form of life is a scar on the evolutionary scale of species. He thought, because he studied so intensely all these species, and you can Google his particular personality. His whole life was about studying species of life. And just to simplify it, you know, like the bees, they give honey, the cow gives milk. Every species has a dharma to perform within this universal structure. But when it comes to the human form of life, George Gaylord Simpson, scratching his head because he has no information about the spirituality, he has no information about spiritual knowledge, and as a result he can't understand why the human being is so destructive. Because if we look at life beyond Vrindavan, we're sort of sheltered here a little bit. It's true, I mean, due to lack of knowledge, the whole society, regardless of what country we're talking about, is being destroyed. Mother Nature, material nature, is being exploited. Like I live in Australia, and Australia the country is so rich in minerals, and they are digging like sometimes 2 miles into the earth. I'm not talking about gold, because gold mines, we know, go very deep. But if you look at coal and other minerals that the Chinese, you know, China, they want all these minerals to try to advance their material civilization. So all over the world, everyone is exploiting Mother Earth on so many different levels to try to improve the materialistic side of life. So George Gaylord Simpson was constantly scratching his head as to find, why is that happening? Why is there so much destruction in the world? Just like if you look at the human form of life, we don't really have too many ways of defending ourselves like the animals do. The animals have claws and they have very sharp teeth. And if you study species of life, the animals are very, very good at defending and attacking. Krishna has arranged so many wonderful defense mechanisms and attacking mechanisms. But when it comes to the human form of life, our appendages, our hands, our teeth, the teeth are not sharp, they're not pointed, they're not strong. They quickly decay if we actually eat and drink the wrong things. And with arms, with our hands. So we have to extend the appendage with a gun or a knife to defend ourselves. And then of course it goes on and on and on and on and on, up to tanks and guided missiles, and it just goes on and on. So what George Gaylord Simpson didn't know was that the human form of life wasn't meant for that pathway. The pathway for the human form of life is to go, like Prabhupada says, spirituality means to go within, not without. So, as we know, Krishna is in the heart of every living entity. And the goal of the human form of life is for one to engage in bhakti yoga. As I've said, it's a means to the end. Because in the spiritual world, everyone is completely 100% engaged in unalloyed devotion to Krishna. And that is the Param Dharma. That is exactly what we are all supposed to be engaged in. So Arjuna is posing this question in the very first verse of the 12th chapter, just for the sake of us, not for the sake of himself. He's saying, which is the important path, the impersonal path or the path of devotion? So there's a sloka, it's a very simple sloka which explains this very, very nicely. And it goes like this: Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami Sakaleya Shanta Krishna Bhakta Naishkama Ata Eva Shanta. Okay, now I just want to put that verse aside, just park it for a minute, because I'm coming to another verse which explains very nicely the connections. Vedanti tat tadva vidam tatvam yajganam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti sabhyate. So Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he has energies. Like he's already explained in the 7th chapter that he has what he calls himself as an inferior energy, the material energy. He also has a marginal spiritual energy, which is ourselves. Okay? And he also has the Aladini internal spiritual energy of the spiritual world, the Vaikuntha planets, Goloka Vrindavan. So, this impersonal nature or aspect of Krishna's personality is a combination of three things. Prabhupada describes this in the Srimad Bhagavatam very nicely, that the impersonal light, or the divine light, or the Brahma Jyoti, is such a very bright, luminous energy. And Prabhupada said it consists of three things. It's the bodily emanation of the Supreme Lord. It is the bodily emanation of the spiritual spark, and it is also the emanations of the Vaikuntha planets in the Vaikuntha lokas. So combining these three, that's why it is so bright and luminous. And there are persons that practice, jnanis, that are convinced that this particular aspect is the goal of life. And they try to merge into that divine light, thinking that they are the same quality as the divine light. They don't think that they have a personality. But due to the grace of Srila Prabhupada and all the parampara, especially coming from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the philosophy is very, very clearly explained that beyond the Brahma Jyoti there is a localized aspect of Krishna. And this localized aspect is dependent on Bhagavan. It is not an independent Vishnu. And that Paramatma is the goal of our human form of life. And in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where it's explained, Lord in the heart, it's a beautiful rendering of how we connect as individual souls to the localized Paramatma within the heart. And Prabhupada says that even the layman can understand the basics of how that works. And Prabhupada talks about localized intelligence. Just like it's explained that in the 18th chapter that the living entity or the marginal energy is within a machine made of material energy. So that material energy moves us around everywhere in the form of walking, talking, running, whatever we want, however we want to drive it. It's a machine that we drive. So it's important to understand that within that material energy we are situated, and alongside the soul is the super soul. And once one is connected, like Prabhupada says in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, when the mind is conquered, when the senses are controlled and the mind is conquered, the super soul is reached. And I remember a very, very nice interaction with Srila Prabhupada in Vrindavan. And this is a story that I wasn't even able to say because there were so many God brothers and God sisters talking. And we all have so many different experiences with Srila Prabhupada. But at this particular time, I remember Guru Das and Yamuna were there in Vrindavan. There was just a small group of us, maybe 9, 10 of us all together. And one day Prabhupada came out and he said, very seriously, I am in complete union with the Super Soul. There's not a thing that I don't do that is not directed by the Super Soul. And we were all stunned, shocked, amazed. You know, you name it, we were it. Right? So Prabhupada says, as a result, he said, if you have any doubts, if you want to clear up any inquiries, we will go in small groups of 2 or 3, and we will walk up the Chatikara road, and we will find a very nice place to sit down, and you will ask me any questions you want, because I am in union with Krishna within the heart. I can clear up any doubts, misconceptions. You please take advantage of that. And I thought, my goodness, you know, how fortunate we are to have such a spiritual master. And that, usually Prabhupada is very cautious how he speaks to his disciples. It's not that he talks in that kind of way very often, you know, so we were very fortunate to know that. So this is what it's all about. It's all about connecting. Brahmanda Brahmate Kona Bhagavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasade Pai, Bhakti Lata Bij. So coming into contact with a bona fide spiritual master gives us full, complete understanding of Vedic philosophy, of the absolute truth. Yashmin vignate savam ivam vignatam bhavanti. That when the cause of all causes becomes known, then automatically everything knowable becomes known and nothing remains unknown. So, when we go beyond the localized Paramatma, then we understand the Supreme Lord, Krishna himself, Bhagavan. Bhaga means opulences and Van means the possessor of. So Krishna is the possessor of all opulences. So when one knows these things, even if they're not realized, it gives the impetus to render devotional service. You may be in awe and reverence, thinking, my goodness, you know, Krishna, even though he's just a small baby, a small child, yet he is the full Godhead. Every single avatar appears in that small little body of Krishna. So that is the ultimate goal, is to go onto the bhakti path, not on the impersonal path, because the nature of the marginal energy is twofold. The first thing is that the marginal energy is always desirous. It is always looking for pleasure. We cannot avoid looking for pleasure. That is the nature, that is the raw nature of who we are. And we are a servant. So we serve and we desire. That is the nature of marginal energy, you know. We're always looking for pleasure. And of course that pleasure is the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord Krishna. Once we know that and work in a way that we know that, that is when we are on the path of perfection. And as Prabhupada has put it very, very wonderfully, he says that the human form of life is about preparing oneself to be loved and adored by Krishna. That is what is the goal of life. So that preparation is exactly what Arjuna is talking about, because he's already convinced, he already knows that his duty is to love Krishna. So just backpedaling, I remember in the early days in London, before coming to India, coming to Vrindavan, I went to a lecture that Srila Prabhupada gave in Conway Hall in London, and he gave this wonderful lecture about Krishna. He was focusing specifically on Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And there was this older lady, she must have been in her late 50s, and she'd shaved her head and she had these very dark maroon clothes, robes on. And she said to Prabhupada, or she asked Prabhupada, how do you know, how do we know? You know. She smiled and she says, you know, but how can we know that Krishna is the Supreme Lord? So Prabhupada thought for just 30 seconds or so, and then he said, there are three pathways. And the first pathway is Shraddha, faith. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, of all yogis, he who abides in me with great faith, worshipping me in transcendental loving service, is the highest. So faith, if you look at the index at the back of the Bhagavad Gita, I think there's 2 pages on faith. You can reference so many points on faith. It's so important to have faith. Faith especially based on knowledge, not blind faith, but faith based on knowledge, pure knowledge that the spiritual master gives you. So Prabhupada says, first you have to have faith. Anything you do, you have to have some faith around it. And then the second point is, you have to do, a hypothesis. Prabhupada said the hypothesis is very, very important. So I'm talking about the hypothesis of engaging in the process of bhakti. Engaging in the process. Yeah, Abhideya. And he says, if you engage in the process, if you do the hypothesis with faith, with great faith, eventually you get the third pathway, which is direct perception. Prabhupada says you can directly see Krishna. So faith, engaging in the process, and Krishna's benediction of allowing you to see him. And this is what that point is all about, where Prabhupada says human form of life is meant for preparing yourself. So you prepare yourself through the process of devotional service, which is the means and the end. So, does that sound good to you? Yeah?
What was the third point?
Direct perception. Just like in Hyderabad, when we opened the temple, there was a real catastrophe happened in Hyderabad. And what happened was, there was a young Indian girl, and I don't know if I've told this story to you before. Have you heard about this? And she was a new devotee. She was probably about 16, 17 years of age, and that's unusual in India for the parents to allow such a young, innocent girl to join a movement like that. But her parents were extremely pious, and for whatever reason, well, we didn't really meet her parents, but we were told they were very pious and had no animosity towards, Srila Prabhupada or his movement. So she joined, but after a few days, she was helping with different things. I don't know how it happened exactly, but her sari caught on fire. And she was wearing a polyester sari, because she couldn't afford anything else. And that was the end of it. She just burned alive. And it was horrible. We were all over the impact of her dying in such a way, like today, I was at the hospice, and our godbrother, Russell, he passed away. I was very, very fortunate to get there 10 minutes before he passed away. Yeah, he's gone this morning. This morning he passed away. I think it was 9 minutes past 10 this morning. So there were a group of 15 approximately devotees there. And his passing away was glorious. His mouth was open, and he had loads of tulsi on his tongue, he had loads of garlands around him. And he looked very, very peaceful. His body was very white, almost as white as my dhoti. And the room felt peaceful, and we were all chanting very loudly, and he was moving, his mouth was moving, and his eyes were transfixed, but his mouth was going in and out, up and down like that. And he would slightly turn his head slightly. And then within 5, 6, 7 minutes he had passed, Doctors came in and felt his pulse and had their stethoscopes out, and they say, yeah, he's passed. So we closed his eyes, and we put tulsi leaves over his eyes, and we just chanted for another half an hour or so. But this girl, and that's nice, because we can conclude that it's a beautiful send-off, and I'm sure that he's gone back to God. Well, who am I to say? I'm just assuming that he's gone back to God. But this girl, she died a horrific death, really, really horrible. And Prabhupada knew we were all impacted, and eventually we went in to see Srila Prabhupada that same day, a little later on in the day, and we asked Prabhupada, what has happened to this young girl? No one knew her, she was just new in the movement. And now all of a sudden she's not with us anymore, and her body is burned to death. And we're just wondering, Prabhupada, where did she go? What happened to this new girl? She wasn't initiated. And Prabhupada said, she's gone back to Godhead. So we just never know who we are, who's next to us, because all we see is material bodies. Like Prabhupada says, we're always dreaming. We dream in the night, we dream in the day. You know, in the day we dream, I am a sannyasi, I am a brahmachari, I am a grihasta, I am wearing white cloth, I am hungry. This is all dreaming. You know? In the night we dream. Was she? Sheesh. Yeah, so there you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. So, we have to develop the eyes to see, I guess. So we have to develop spiritual eyes. It's like Prabhupada. You know. I was reading the other day in the Adi Leela, Chaitanya Charitamrita, how Krishna's senses are always interchangeable. Krishna's senses could do anything. And of course, our senses can't in the material world, but once we are liberated and we have spiritual bodies, our senses are also mutable like that. We can, you know, eat with our ears, I guess. Or as Dhananjay was saying the other day, you know, because of the absolute nature of spiritual energy, I've never heard this before, but he was saying that you ask the rice if it's ready. Are you ready? Oh, not quite. You know? I've never heard that before, but that's what he was saying. You know? So. Was it Radharani? Was it? Yeah. Radharani was asking the rice. That's right, in relationship with Radharani. I guess it makes more sense now, doesn't it? Anyway. But getting back to the point of the Bhagavad Gita, that is the impersonal aspect of Krishna's energy, that is the localized aspect, and then there is the supreme aspect of Bhagavan, which comes out more and more as we go through into the final chapters. So I think I'll finish it there. If there are any questions, or yeah.
Thank you very much, Gunana Prabhu, for the explanation on Bhagavad Gita. I was reflecting on how you were making this distinction between the path of impersonalism and the path of bhakti, or the path of devotional service. And I was thinking how most devotees would never think that I'm an impersonalist. I believe in Bhagavan. I believe in the personal form of Krishna. And then I was thinking about the paradox in how sometimes we deal with one another. Because I was trying to think, how does impersonalism manifest in our day-to-day life? Because generally I would think, oh no, impersonalism, that's not really relevant to me, because I'm not a follower of Sripad Shankaracharya. I believe in what Prabhupada teaches. But it was brought to my attention today because I was glorifying different devotees online during our wonderful celebration here. And another devotee wrote a personal message to me, and he said, I remember when I was just a young brahmachari in that temple, and I had broken my pelvis, and I was sitting in a kind of a not a normal way for prasadam, and this devotee walked in, and he barked at me and said, are you an animal? You know, how dare you sit like that during prasadam time? Sit up properly, like a devotee. And in great pain, this devotee followed suit and listened. And I was thinking, gee, that was really harsh. And, we've lost devotees because of being presumptuous, which it seems being presumptuous, it has some connection with being impersonal. And, you've seen so much, and you've dealt with so many devotees.
Sure.
So I was wondering if you could please make some comment.
Well, I'd love to do that. First of all, everyone's experiencing is subjective. We perceive through the senses. But if we're not aware of how we do that, that's when we start doing the things that you've just described, you know. Empathy also is very important. Empathy. But it's just like we have knowledge, just like we have spiritual knowledge, we have material knowledge. It's good to learn other things. Like, for instance, psychology. My occupation back in Australia, I'm a psychotherapist. I deal with very difficult men, perpetrators of violence against women, on a daily basis within the courtrooms, dealing with magistrates and police prosecution services like that. And my role is to meet and greet these men when they come to court. They've been summoned to court, and I have to meet and greet them, and I have to prepare them for the courtroom, for the sentencing. And so I've been fortunate enough to spend many years in understanding psychology and how to deal with human nature is very complex, and we come through with so much lived experience, and sometimes that lived experience, be it negative, positive, particularly the negatives, we store it away, little drawers and cupboards within ourselves, right? We don't want to deal with it. Maybe we've been abused ourselves by our father or mother, you know, family members, friends, who knows? In some way or another, abuse has happened in our lives. And instead of dealing with that, bringing it out and sharing those experiences so we can move on in a healthy fashion, we store them up. And what happens usually is that when we're dealing with other people, what we call displace. We displace our frustrations of those lived experiences on other people. So something may trigger that. So for instance, when a devotee may walk into the room and see that person sitting in a certain way, it gives them the opportunity, it's a trigger. Oh, he's not sitting properly, so let me just get right on him and tell him. And then spare no mercy in the way I tell him. And that's simply because it's our stuff. It's called, we have stuff, we have experiences locked away. Locked away. And it takes different triggers. Trigger can be anything. Maybe in this particular instance, it was the way the person was sitting. So unfortunately, we can, unless you really try, and just like a pure devotee, he sees the heart. He can see into your heart. He can see past, present, and future. But we can't unless we are pure. So as we go about our business, the subtle body builds through the desires, through the building blocks of desires, new gross bodies. And when we're in a gross body, living a life according to that gross body, we have so many lived experiences moment to moment. And like I said, our experiences could be very, very negative, depending on the birth that we take, even right from the beginning, you know. And that's why it's important that we deal with one another in a very nice way. Because we should deal with how we would like to be dealt, you know, with one another. Like Gandhi would say, do as you would be done by, you know? So it's not that everyone has to become a psychologist, But at the same time, it's important to understand how to be kind and thoughtful to others. You know, because we are uniquely individuals. Because if you look at the senses of everybody in this room, we're also uniquely different. We have different color eyes, different shaped ears and noses and mouths and teeth and hair. And, you know, that's because we have in our past life desired throughout life in a certain way. And desires are building blocks to the next body. And all of a sudden we get a body. So I'm looking at your body, you're looking at my body, and you see we're uniquely individual. There is no one the same in this room. And that's the uniqueness of personalized philosophy. We're people, we're persons, we're not impersonal. Just like it's been talked about a little bit earlier on. We are personal, we are persons within the material body. And every time because we are uniquely individual persons, that is why we manifest uniquely individual bodies. You understand? So, in the human form of life, as we develop Krishna consciousness, the byproduct of Krishna consciousness, or one of the big ones, is humility. And it's like a benchmark, really, you know. Lord Chaitanya says one can chant the holy name in a humble state of mind, thinking himself lower than the straw in the street, more tolerant than the tree. I remember Srila Prabhupada when a week before he left, I was chanting in a small group of devotees. There were 4 of us. Prabhupada wanted 24-hour kirtan. That's how the 24-hour kirtan began. Because it started off, Prabhupada just wanted to hear kirtan, gently performed, melodiously performed. And he was sitting on his bed and his feet were dangling over the side. And we go in, 3 or 4 of us, little groups of us, and we chant with a very small pair of cymbals, and we chant like this. And I knew within my heart that Prabhupada wasn't going to be with us for much longer. His body was dilapidated. And somehow or other, I guess I was selfish, really. And as I was chanting, I looked up at Prabhupada like this, and he was looking down with his eyes closed. I was right near his feet. And I sort of shouted out, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, and I shouted, and I was really loud, you know. And Prabhupada sort of went like this, you know, and he was looking down at me like this, and I was like this, not wanting to look up, you know. I thought I've upset him again. I'm always upsetting Prabhupada, you know. He's always getting on my case, you know. And I've done it again, and I felt really bad, but I just needed to say that. I don't know, I was like... And carried on chanting for about 2 minutes, and then Prabhupada stopped the kirtan, and he looked at me and he said, you brought that black cow to my door. See the front door as you go out to Prabhupada. Prabhupada wanted a jet black cow. And it took us a while to find one, but we got one. And the milk from a black, really black cow without any white spots, the milk apparently is more nutritious. This is what we're told anyway. And Prabhupada asked for a black cow. So we found a black cow and we tied it outside, we gave it busa and fed it, and we were milking it outside, and we bring it straight to Prabhupada. That's all he could drink, you know? And Prabhupada said to me in a very humble voice, he said, this is your mercy that I am living today, because you have brought that black cow and I'm drinking the milk. This is your mercy, this is your mercy. He kept